with Deloitte, and 12 of those years as a partner with Deloitte. And then I was very fortunate at a point in my career, around about 2014, I came and lived in Nairobi for 3 years, and that's where I met Martin. My entire family, actually, strangely enough, were born in Kenya, so I have a great affinity to the region, and having spent time there, I have an even greater affinity to the region. It's always nice to be connected to it, and it's an area that we see certainly as a very advanced area from a business perspective, and a marketplace that we certainly want to play in. I'll introduce you just to Nick, and Nick is sitting next to me. We're fortunate enough to not have to do distance socially at the moment. But Nick has had 18 years of experience in a Big Four environment. 7 of those were in the UK. And Nick joined us in South Africa. And actually, strangely enough, the first engagement that we worked on together was in Tanzania. Nick has spent also many visits through to Nairobi, where we've done a lot of work in Kenya across different domains. Nick's also led a cyber risk and technology business within the Western Cape region, which is where we're based. And he has a background in IT risk assurance, as well as in forensics. So he shares some commonality, but a broader range of experience across the cyber world. Having been at Deloitte for a good number of years, we actually started NCOX around about 1.5 years ago. And in that journey, we have formed a strategic partnership with Snowed. And it's really a component of our business, but focusing on the cybersecurity world. And I guess, and Nithen, I'm going to ask you to kind of take it further, but where we see the synergy between ourselves and Snowed, with Snowed being very strong on the technology side and ourselves being very strong on the human risk intelligence side. And when one places those two together, it's a formidable team that we are taking to the market across Africa. And you will see a lot of us in the East African region in the years to come. So Nithen, will kind of hand over to you, let you take the first part of the presentation forward. The aim of this is to give you some perspective of what we think really around lifting some of the cybersecurity challenges into the boardroom. Obviously, this is a very broad topic, and we could speak about it for days really on end, but we try to focus it very narrowly, and we hope that it adds some value to you. Nithen, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nithen Naidu, and I am I'm the CEO and founder of Snowed Technologies. Snowed Technologies is a cyber defense firm based in Africa. And what we do is we build solutions in Africa for Africa. Luckily for us, we've been fortunate enough, the rest of the world likes our solutions too. So today you can get our African technology across 6 continents in over 85 client environments. We monitor just around 5 million devices, which is which is both an honor and a privilege to represent Africa on a global stage. I'm just going to, give me 1 second. I'm just going to ask Nick for control of the presentation. Thank you. So I'm in a quarantine facility because I'm in Southeast Asia. We're here doing some work, and we're opening up an office in Southeast Asia. And unfortunately, I may not be able to stay for the Q&A session. But Nick and Graham will answer all my questions. And, with that, I'd like to get started. So, there we go, perfect. Always a little bit of gremlins in the beginning of a presentation. So I love this saying, the lack of knowledge provides an ample canvas for our fears, and our fears do not map to the reality of risk. And let me unpack that for you. I used to work at a bank, and one of the policies in the bank is that 2 directors may never fly on the same plane together. So a lot of you guys would be familiar with that kind of policy. But what was funny is they could drive in the car to the airport together. Now, statistically speaking, the chances of them dying in the car were a lot greater than them dying on the plane. But it's that existential risk, right? It's that fiery death falling from the sky that makes us perceive the risk completely differently. Let me give you another example, maybe something closer related to cyber. When Donald Trump got elected, prior to that election, there was a lot of concern around the Russians tampering with the elections. So what they did is they spent millions of dollars securing the election infrastructure and voting stations, right? Because that's where they thought the Russians would attack them. The Russians did influence the elections, except they did it using mass cognitive influence through social media. Now you've got a force of propaganda, and you've got a cyber defense specialist, and they completely miss each other. And the reason for this is, we call it mirror imaging. That means I expect the people who are going to attack me in the same way that I would attack them. And this is really important because Africa has its own sort of socio-economic situation. We've got our own sort of psychology. And sometimes I feel like we get tunnel vision around marketing and buzzwords, right? So we get tunnel vision around zero-day attacks, and we get tunnel vision around like AI is going to solve all my problems. But the truth of the matter is, what's more probable? That somebody's going to use a zero-day attack, compromise your firewall, use zero-day attacks and laterally move through your network, use a zero-day attack and access your database and then exfiltrate your data, or they're going to pay $1,000 to your database administrator and he's going to take that information off your database and give it to them in their hands. See, the African landscape is different. The first time I used Snowed, we used it in a mining client. And that mining client was actually a PwC engagement because we've got a relationship with PwC where they use our technology to audit their clients. It just so happens that they were auditing this client, and at the same time, there was a lady who extracted data from their finance server. And we saw it, and the machine picked up this anomaly, we reported it, and didn't know what to make of it. But what actually happened was, she had been asked by organized labor to pull buying and selling prices, salary information, all that kind of financial data ahead of a union's wage negotiation with the organization. We caught that. But and that's fantastic. But if you think about it, no antivirus, no firewall, nothing in the world is going to save you from that kind of risk. And that's a very kind of, contextual risk, something for Africa. And the problem is, if your perception of risk is skewed and you do not understand your vulnerabilities, your threats, and ultimately your risk, then your defense is ultimately ineffective. And while we have this tunnel vision, around zero-day attacks and AI and any other three-letter acronym, the problem we're facing is largely a data problem. We don't know what the threats are necessarily. We don't know where the vulnerabilities lie. We don't know where our assets are and and what's happening with our assets. And therefore our perception of risk is skewed, and therefore our defenses often fail us. And my message today in this presentation is to encourage you not to get that tunnel vision, to understand that in most cases, we get pulled into most of the high-profile breaches across the continent to assist people defend that kind of infrastructure. Most of the time, what we find is we failed on the basics. And that's largely because we understand our risk in terms of marketing that's not even generated in Africa. And it's largely fear-based, right? It's got a big snake, cobra, or tiger, and it has nothing to do with what our threat landscape looks like. And we get all these promises of this nirvana, of this panacea, that you are going to deploy our technology and your problem is going to go away. Trust me, Africa's problems is so unique. I don't think any technology is going to solve it. not any technology by itself. The problem is you already have the data. It's just that the data is all disparate. And even if you bring that data together, it's cognitive overload to try and process all this data, all the vulnerability scans, all the system logs, all the internet and social media data that you're going to be using now to understand whether you have a risk of fake news, whether you have a brand reputation risk on the internet. How do you consume that data? Because we're not in the data age anymore. I like to think we're in the intelligence age. We have too much data. That's part of the problem. So I think my message to everyone today is use an intelligence-led strategy. And that's what we promote. You know, I'm not here to sell you a product. I'm not here to sell you a service. I'm really here to sell you a message of both hope and assistance. To say, focus your limited resources, because we are limited, right? Where you need it the most. And the only way you can do that is through intelligence. That will maximize your response of effectiveness and efficiency. And if you can use your data properly, and this extends beyond the bounds of cybersecurity. If Africa on a whole, if we can learn to use our data properly, we can premeditate attack vectors, understanding attacker tradecraft, and build proactive defenses. Snowden has done this in cybersecurity, but we've also done it to help predict crime. You know, and hopefully we get called into the situation in South Africa, which, you know, I'm not putting my head in the sand. It's something we've got to talk about. But we're hoping we're going to get, you know, pulled into that situation so that we can help that. We have a wealth of data and we have a wealth of intellectual capital, especially when you're talking about Kenya, right? And if we can learn to use our data, we can stop all these African social evils, which are specific to our situation around human trafficking, drug trafficking, you know, the medical issues, finding patient zero in a viral outbreak. This is an intelligence-led strategy that will help us create a better future. So, you know, with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time. I'm so sorry I won't be here for the questions. You know, and also Kenya holds a special place in my heart. It's where we won some of our first innovation awards. You know, we've got some of our awards on the left of the slide. I don't like to talk about it too much, but you know what? I'm very proud that we're the South African Innovation Awards winner, and that we're the MEST Africa winner. MEST is the largest African incubator, and also that we were represented Africa in the Slingshot 2020 and became one of the top 100 tech firms in the world. And with that, I hand back to my team. Thank you so much for your time, guys. And it was amazing to meet you. I'm going to leave my email address in the chat. And if you have any questions specifically for me, please get in touch with me. Happy to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Nithen. That's great. Just trying to move on. So, I mean, given my background, I spent probably about 15 years of it in law enforcement and related agencies, and a large portion of that was in organized crime intelligence. So I'm not new to the intelligence world and can see absolutely the applicability of intelligence within the cybersecurity space. And I guess to start out, I've asked the question, what is intelligence actually? Now, there's a dictionary definition of it, which says it's the collection of information of military or political value. I think the point there really is the value component. And I think from my own perspective, I see intelligence as being information. It starts off as information. And Nithen would have spoken to a lot of that, the available information that comes at us as we start to traverse the cybersecurity domain. But it's information then properly analyzed and assimilated, and then making it, in my mind, both relevant and useful. And then the last component of that is it should be consumed in a way that allows you to apply it. And that's where the value component comes, is apply it either for a strategic or a tactical advantage. in this situation, you can imagine that if you can consume cybersecurity related data, assimilate that into something that you can better understand and better understand threats that are coming at you, and then use that to proactively combat a cybersecurity threat, you're obviously in a much better space. Now, intelligence has obviously been used for many, many years, and it's a very successful tool, and we've used it very successfully in combating organized crime over the years. The argument is that it's the second oldest profession in the world, and I won't go into the first. But there are arguably three typical methodologies that are applied, and usually we would use electronic surveillance, and I've come from a world where we would try and intercept electronic surveillance. We would perform physical surveillance, which is actually going and seeing what's there. And then the third being human intelligence, which is often almost the most effective, because it's the intelligence that you're able to focus very quickly and get information that you need and you want to respond to. And what we would ordinarily do is we would recruit either a person within the organization, or we would place one of our own people within that organization, which is a slightly longer term strategy from an organized crime perspective. But I think that the best option really at the end of the day, go in and recruit someone in the organization if you're trying to get information to react to the organization. Now, what we've seen from a global perspective is the tables have almost turned. So I come at this very much from a law enforcement perspective, and that is how we've operated in combating crime and would operate in combating cybercrime. But the cyber criminals have adopted exactly the same methodology. So they've taken this on, and from their perspective, they are looking at your organization in the same way that we ordinarily looked at organized criminal organizations. So they are looking at trying to intercept electronic communication to better understand your organization. They are equally able to conduct physical surveillance, but from a virtual perspective. And then they are actively looking at your organization's people, because usually, and the easiest and most effective return for least effort is to focus on the human component of the organization, to look for weaknesses there and to access the organization through your people. It doesn't take a lot of technology. There's a lot of information available in the social media world where they can garner this information and they look for weaknesses. And it's very easy to target people within the organization, especially when you have money. So that the tables have largely turned, and to see this as now I've used the analogy there from hunter to hunted. So it's now being on the receiving end of that hunting rather than on the hunting end of it, and a slightly different perspective. Sorry, just trying to, next slide. So what does this mean? Is looking at this is that with the cyber criminals adopting an intelligence-led approach, they're spending a lot of time and energy getting into your organization through that intelligence. What does that mean for us? It means that we effectively need to do exactly the same thing. So for you as leaders in the organization, it's around understanding that and adopting the same intelligence-led approach. So coming at this thing very much from the perspective of understanding the threat out there, but also understanding your environment and understanding the key vulnerabilities. And I guess Nithen touched on this a bit, is that you can get into this domain where the risk is so wide and it's coming at you. Whereas by adopting a more intelligence-led approach, it's the idea that you become far more proactive and far more focused. And I like to use the analogy of protecting one's house. And if you think, typically, what do you do to protect your house from potential thieves or criminals that come at you, is you usually end up putting a big fence around it. So that's the starting point. and we electrify that fence because we see that our neighbors have electric fences. So as long as our fence is slightly higher than our neighbors, then the argument is that they may well go to the next door house. We put a decent gate on the front, and then we usually put a few Ascaris on that gate. And we make sure that we're certainly looking at it as a formidable force when the criminals drive past our neighborhood. And I'm not saying that those are bad things, that those are good things, that those serve very actively as a deterrent. But where does your challenge really lie in most instances is your Ascari falls asleep at the gate, or he leaves it open, and there's an opportunity for a criminal to come in. He bypasses all of your security measures and he's in your property. The same can happen is that they recruit a staff member who leaves the gate open, or who gives them some information on where the weaknesses are for them to come in. That as much as you have this great perimeter security, and it serves very well as a deterrent and serves very well as a mechanism to protect yourself from a broad range of threats, the threat often doesn't come from there. So you often better paid at focusing on those very specific vulnerabilities and understanding them. And that's again where we're saying apply an intelligence-led approach. And I just wanted to throw out a few insights, and we could get into a lot of detail around this, but a few insights that we see and that we think may be applicable to you as leaders in organizations. But my first point being, again, that we tend to focus very much on the perimeter. So the notion that when we look at cybersecurity, we focus on these big ticket items, we focus on big attacks that might come at us. And to Nithen's point around the elections, is that the American elections, you focused on the election infrastructure, whereas one missed the vulnerability that was sitting within the social media side. So the same in terms of that analogy is we focus very much on the outside perimeter security, but we don't manage the gate, and we don't manage some of the human vulnerabilities within the organization, which are often the easiest and give us the greatest return. So that being said, it's exactly where the cyber criminals look. They look for the weakest point, and they look for minimum effort, maximum return. So it's seeing your organization from that perspective. And then what that does is it means that we need to shift from what's a very sort of reactive based approach, and it's quite blanket based, and saying, well, let's put all that down. And again, I'm not saying that you don't need to put all that down, but by moving to a more intelligence-led approach, a bit more proactive and a bit more focused, and understanding what's coming at you. But I guess to take this analogy further, and I won't take it any further after this, but to take the analogy further, it's a bit like putting a sniper on top of your roof with a high-powered rifle and a telescopic sight and watching for the people coming in. So it's a very focused, very narrow, but very effective approach. Then just what we've seen in organizations is that cybersecurity tends to sits on the minds of everyone, but in the actual organization it's seen very much as being driven often by regulation. So the regulator comes out with requirements and we meet those requirements. So if we talk around data security, around privacy, that new regulations come out and we say we need to respond to them. But we tend to also put those into the operational risk category of the business. So it tends to be not outsourced, but it tends to be pushed down slightly in the organization, where we leave it to be dealt with, and we as leaders satisfy ourselves that it is being dealt with. Our view is that is shifting fundamentally, in that this is becoming more and more of a strategic risk, and the need is there very much to pull this up into the boardroom and pull this up to strategic discussions, because it's no longer around threats to the operations, that the growth of your business and your future is very much aligned with your IT infrastructure. And if those two are aligned, your ability to deliver on your strategy is almost partly dependent on your ability to respond to cyber threats and to have an active response plan in the event that something happens. So, and Nick will touch on this a little bit, but the notion that we see this becoming more and more of a C-suite and board concern, and it being pulled up into boardroom conversations. And the question that I guess you should all be asking yourselves is what are the conversations that you're having? What are the conversations that you should be having around cybersecurity in your organization? And how do you focus that in the forums that make sense? So thanks very much from my side. I'll hand over to Nick to take it further.
Thank you, Graham. So good morning, everybody. So what I'll be doing is, as a business leader, so what are some of the key focus areas that, when you go back to your businesses, that you would need to focus on to ensure that your business is and remains cyber resilient? So a good starting point is the boardroom. So quite often a term that is used is tone at the top, and that's often referenced to governance and policy. And in my view, cyber is no different. Cyber within an organization, the tone needs to be set at the top, and that starts in the boardroom. And as Graham mentioned, cyber is typically seen as an IT risk. It sits in an operational environment, and although more and more we see that it is being elevated to a strategic level, quite often in an organization it's still seen as an operational risk. So when you go back into the business and we look at the business, we've got to ask ourselves, are we addressing cyber as a strategic risk in our organization? And if not, why not? The other component within the boardroom is, as a board, have we taken ownership for cyber within the organization? Do we have visibility of our cyber threats, our cyber risks, our mitigating actions that we're taking to address those risks? And critically important as well is that the board leads and promotes a positive cybersecurity culture within the organization. So talking to the people, the human component, it's important that there's a strong cybersecurity culture that's permeated throughout the organization. As often your humans is your weakest link, and they need to be empowered to make the right decisions at the right times. We also spoke around mirroring, and whilst there is a baseline of cyber hygiene that each organization has, it's not necessarily sufficient to copy what other organizations are doing. It's important to understand what are the key risks, how is my business unique, and addressing those with specific measures, whether that is technology, people, or process. But it needs to be addressed to your organization. Most organizations have finite resources, and therefore it's important that those finite resources are invested in the most efficient and effective way to address cyber threats. Also important in the boardroom is a strong level of cyber literacy. It's important that board members have cyber literacy. They understand the concepts of cyber and the impacts that it has on the business. And where there are gaps in that cyber literacy on the board, give consideration to independent advisors to the board. Perhaps the appointment of non-executive directors that have strong cyber capabilities and experience that can bring that to the table. Interestingly enough, Gartner is predicting that by 2025, 40% of boards will have a dedicated cybersecurity committee, which is also indicative of the importance and the focus that cyber should be getting at a board level. But I mean, that is all fair and well, but there's fundamental basics that organizations need to have in place in order to have a effective cyber hygiene. Now, it's important not necessarily for the board to be driving this operationally, but for the board to understand the level of cyber hygiene within the organization. First and foremost, you cannot manage what you don't know. So as a board, ask your CIO, your CISOs, do we know what assets we have within the organization? Do we understand where the critical assets are, critical assets that contain personal information, intellectual property, where they are in the organization? Are they adequately protected? So if we use an analogy, so if we take a bank, for example, quite often back in the day, the signature cards would be stored in a locked cabinet just behind, the counter in the bank. And that was sufficient to protect that type of asset. However, the cash and the gold that may have been stored within that bank was stored within a vault, and it had multiple layers of security built around it to protect it. And the same is true for data. You have different types of data, publicly available types of data, but highly sensitive and confidential data. Does the organization know where that data sits? Quite often the board receives a lot of information that provides some risk indicators as to how well the organization may be managing its cyber risks. So if you think second line assurance, so your risk and compliance, they often report into the board on risks or on findings that they've had in respect of risks that haven't been properly mitigated or areas of non-compliance. Third line assurance, quite often internal audits, perform audits within the IT environment, within the business process environment. External audits, focus on financial controls, but also includes IT controls. So within those reports, there's these key risk indicators that the board can obtain from that information to understand from a vulnerability and patch management perspective, are our key assets being patched in a timely manner? So when patches are released by software vendors, are they being applied in a timely manner to address known vulnerabilities within the organization? If internal audits are reporting that a number of vulnerabilities remain remediated, ask the questions, why is that the case? Because the longer that those known vulnerabilities are not remediated, the more exposed an organization could be in terms of those being exploited. Identity and access management. So in my experience, I've performed a number of IT audit reviews where the basics such as removing users from systems when they leave the organization, or changing the permissions that that employees have when they move within the organization, often fail. And accounts that remain open or active once an employee leaves the organization creates a potential risk for that to be exploited, either by that employee, if they're perhaps a disgruntled employee, or by a malicious attacker from outside of the organization. So if we find in reports where user accounts are not being terminated in a timely manner, that can be indicative of controls that aren't operating effectively or being circumvented. Privileged access management. Quite often attackers will look to leverage privileged access or user accounts that have privileged level of access to systems. And it makes sense. Going back to what Graham mentioned, is you get in your bang for your buck. You get access to one account, but you get access to a lot of information or to a lot of systems. So are these accounts being managed properly? Cybersecurity awareness and training. Going back to the culture, it's important that there's a strong security culture within the organization, and that's driven through training and awareness. And just the last point on this slide is a backup strategy. So quite often ransomware attacks, the cyber criminals or the cyber threat actors that target the organization, they already know where your backups are stored. So if you're doing a high availability replication to disk, those backups are highly likely to be encrypted as well. So when you brought down through a ransomware attack, you don't have backups to go back to. So really you need to consider offline tape backups. Do we have offline tape backups in place? And if we don't, why not? To me, most importantly, and this also feeds into what Graham was saying, is the human risk. So humans are by nature the weakest link in the cyber chain. Now, we need to understand the risk that presents to an organization. So whilst training and awareness is important, and having assessments to feed back whether or not employees have understood what they've learned through the process, I believe that's no longer enough. It's important now that we also understand the sentiment of employees. So what is employees' sentiment towards cybersecurity within the organization? What is their sentiment towards the protection of data that's held within the organization? Because quite often they can know what to do, but if they are disgruntled, or if they're disinterested in cybersecurity, it creates a point of weakness. And last but not least is, you need to understand, how will your employees respond to a cyber threat? So leveraging simulations, phishing simulations. How will an employee respond to an email that lands in their mailbox with a link? Attack simulations. So ask yourselves, do we need to have an external service provider to simulate an attack on our environment to understand how will our cyber response teams respond to that? How will our board respond to that in terms of the communication and the engagement with stakeholders? And simulate different scenarios to really understand how your organization can respond to those threats. It's still on the human side. So humans, by their very nature, are curious. They want to understand. What is this that I've been asked to do, or that I'm being offered? If a cyber criminal sends a phishing link, for example, they want to be helpful. So if somebody approaches one of your employees and says, I would really want to understand, what systems do you guys use? Because we looking to buy new software ourselves. So I just want to understand what systems you have. The employees want to help. They want to engage, to be seen to be helpful. And quite often we're naive, or we're unaware. So we don't always necessarily understand the repercussions of being helpful or being curious. And that's why the training awareness is no longer sufficient, in my view, on its own. We need to understand more around humans. We need to understand the human risk component of our business, and that is intelligence driven. And I guess last but not least, it's a case of when it happens, no longer if it's going to happen, but when it happens, we need to be ready, right? So as business leaders, ask your CISOs, ask your CIOs, are we ready for a cyber breach? How do we know we're ready? Organizations, so IBM Security have issued a report, and that report found that organizations that had a breach, the organizations that had an cybersecurity incident response plan in place, on average, lost less. The breach. Sorry, So organizations on average had a lower cost of that breach, where they had a cyber incident response plan in place, than those organizations that didn't. So it's critically important that your organization has a cyber incident response plan in place. Some of the key components of that plan is having clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Your plan needs to be dynamic. Threats change all the time. So, you have a core set of roles and responsibilities, but also understand, who do you need to call on in what scenarios, in what situations. Ask, has your plan been tested? Linking back into simulations. Let's simulate potential attacks, and let's see how our plan stacks up against that. And of course, the important component of that is to feed that back into your plan, to make sure that next time, the plan can hold up. Critically important for business leaders is, have we identified our stakeholders? Do we understand who who will communicate with them? Will it be the CEO? Will it be a PR agency? How will we communicate with them? And what are we going to communicate? Also very important is your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. They also need to be updated. They also need to be tested regularly, because with a ransomware attack, when systems are down, it's critically important that the business can continue to function. So your business continuity plans will kick in. Disaster recovery plans may necessitate that you need to move to another site where you've got equipment, you've got hardware, you've got infrastructure that you can restore your offline backups to get your systems back up and running whilst trying to recover from the ransomware attack. And I think I'm just going to close on another statistic from the IBM security report, is that so the incident response testing on average reduced the cost of a data breach by 8%. So just purely by testing your plan, you're already able to have an impact on the cost, the potential cost of a data breach. So thank you. I'm going to pass you back to Graham just to close on some key takeaways.
Thanks, Nick. Just maybe by way of an anecdotal comment is that we recently became privy to information around a breach that occurred in South Africa with a rather large gym chain. And it was interesting that they had in the region of 80 servers that were breached. And in fact, when it happened, it became apparent that they didn't know that they had 80 servers. They only became aware when they actually started to search around in response to a breach that those were the extent of their assets, and they started to look around to understand what backups, how can they restore. But it was only at the point of an attack that they actually truly understood their IT assets and landscape, and a big challenge, obviously. So just key takeaways, and I'm aware, everyone, that this is obviously quite a complex issue and a complex field to traverse in quite a short space of time. But the first point that we make is elevating the conversations around cyber risk to the leadership level. And I guess, Martin, that's the gist of what you do is having leadership conversations. We're saying make sure that the leadership conversations include a strategic level approach to cyber risk in the business. So bring those conversations up. I think it's having meaningful conversations in the boardroom, and what I think is really important is for leaders in the business to increase your awareness, to increase your knowledge around cybersecurity, to increase your vocabulary around cybersecurity. That no longer can we sit and say, well, this is the domain of others, and we pay attention to it, but we don't truly understand it. I think those days are past, and we as leaders of businesses truly have to play a real role in understanding this risk domain and being able to hold our own in the conversations and being able to assess plans based on a greater knowledge base. The third message is really where we've said, listen, focus, narrow, that yes, you can do the mirroring game where you mirror your neighbors, but always make sure that you have a very strong threat intelligence component to what you do so that you can see what's coming at you. And then the last component, and Nick would have spoken to this a lot, is focus on the one area of real weakness, which is the human risk in this. So when you narrow this down using intelligence, use a large component of that to focus on the human risk intelligence component of your business. So I hope that's been enlightening. We just wanted to give you some perspectives, give you some views, and start the conversations certainly within your groups and in your C-suites and within your boards to be having some interesting conversations in this area. So Martin, thanks very much, and happy to take some questions and see how we go.
Thank you very much, Graham, Nick, and Nithen earlier on. Really great insights coming out there, and I think you've brought it down to a level that we can begin to appreciate without too much of your technical jargon in this space. So I appreciate that. We have just about under 10 minutes for this session, so I'll open it up for questions. I did note that there were 2 questions or comments in the chat box, and let me just look at those. So from Steve Mambo, great insights. Nithen, biggest challenge in managing cyber risk is that we ignore the basics and forget that the African threat landscape is so unique from the rest of the world. Tech can only address approximately 20%. The major work should be in the processes and people. I guess that's a comment, but Graham, do you have any views on that or any add-ons to that?
I mean, absolutely, I agree with it, and that's our approach. I think that too often we adopt a catch-all global view of these types of things without having an African perspective. And certainly, you know, our African experience, we are from the continent and exist on it, and believe that you need an African view in doing that. And then the component around the technology piece, I think absolutely you can only rely on the tech for so much, that this is very much a people problem as well.
Right. And then we got a question from Churchill Mwinde. From a business point of view, does your organization create an overlay dashboard for monitoring activity outside the norms? For example, data extraction. Graham?
Nick, you want to?
Yes, so absolutely. So Nithen's technology, the Guardian technology, what it does, that does exactly that. So just at a high level, it's a node that is placed in an environment and it monitors network traffic. So if there's a data exfiltration happening, it picks that up, and it can even go as far as quarantining that for a period of time until somebody within the organization has had the opportunity to establish whether or not that's a legitimate exfiltration of data.
Thanks. And there's a couple of appreciations around the analogies that you guys used. There's another question here, which has got 2 sides to it. I think Steve Mambo raises it. He says, the idea of setting up committees at the board will lead to the same challenge we face today. It is somebody else's responsibility. We should ideally be advocating for every board member to take ownership on the cyber resilience strategy. And as we mature on the know-how, we can consider forming committees to own the business risk. But I also see Musonda countering that to say that having a committee does allow focused discussions around critical issues. So just a comment there again from you guys.
So I think I agree with both. So my point that I made in the takeaway is that the whole board needs to improve their cyber knowledge and their cyber vocabulary, and being able to truly start to own this. Because I think that is the problem, that if we tend to even push it below the board. So getting it to a board would be the first challenge, but getting it to having a meaningful conversation at a board level. But I think that a committee would help to focus some of the efforts, but I think that does not abdicate responsibility across the board. And I think one should be careful of abdicating on the basis of kind of pushing it into one committee that is solely responsible for it. I think it is the entire board's responsibility to be proactively having conversations around cyber risk. So it's a bit of both, I think, if that helps.
Right. Okay. I guess the discussion here probably goes back to the point you made around culture and the culture of the board and the culture of the entire organization around cybersecurity. Yeah.
Martin,
yeah.
Martin, perhaps just to add to that is, so typically a CIO would sit on the board, and the CIO is extremely cyber literate, and the other board members should have the right level of knowledge to be able to interrogate what's been reported back to the board through the CIO, to raise pertinent questions, to challenge the CIO. So if we think finance, So a board typically would deal with financial matters. And most of the board members will have a strong financial literacy and be able to question investment decisions or spending, or, and I believe the same should be for cyber.
Yeah, I think you make a very valid and strong point there. And I think that comparison is quite useful actually, because everybody in the board tends to to go into the financial discussions, but nobody actually goes into the cyber discussions because of lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, and are we going to look stupid here by asking these kind of questions? So yeah, I mean, I don't know how you actually get there. Nick, is this kind of programs, it's specific training for board members on cyber type issues, some regular updates, etc.
Absolutely. So I think it's a combination. It is. So when new board members come on board, it's having an induction program that brings a certain level of cyber awareness and understanding as part of that process. There's more formal training, as Martin, as you've mentioned, but I think it's also important for board members themselves to research and understand. And it doesn't take a lot of searching on the internet to get news articles to understand how attackers are targeting organizations. To understand what technologies are out there to help combat, and just to raise that awareness around the terms, the concepts, the threat vectors that an organization can be exposed to. And just by bringing that level of understanding, coupled with understanding what is the baseline of cyber hygiene within an organization, can already give you enough to be able to converse with the CIO. Like with the CFO, a lot of people understand debits and credits, and understand money and they understand money out. Not everyone understands accounting standards, but you don't need to understand the detail necessary of the accounting standards to be able to ask a CFO questions around the financials.
Right. Thank you very much. We're coming to the top of the hour. Let me just open up if anybody has got a question or a comment that they want to voice from the participants today. I don't see any hand up. And so what remains for me is really to thank you, Graham, Nick, and Nithen for this. The time is very, very short. And of course, this is a big, heavy technical area. And we can't even ask all the questions that we have in the time available. But at least you've enabled us to get a certain level of awareness. And I like your last slide, Graham, where you pull it all together in terms of the simple messages that you have there. So that's a big takeaway for people on this call, and the other people who had registered for this call but were not able to join us today. We will be sharing your presentation with them, and hopefully we can begin to generate interest in this subject for the future and for the better for growth of our organizations on the continent. I note in one of your slides, and it's actually something that we've noted here, that Kenya ranks very, very high in terms of the cyber threat constituency. And I think 2 weeks ago, there was a report from the Communications Commission of Kenya, which was quite scary and alarmist about just the number of threats that have been seen in this country in recent times. So it's a big deal, actually. So it's a wake-up call for all of us on this call to pick up. So thank you all very much. As usual, the leadership group is available, and with its partners such as Insiox and Snode, we can begin to do some interesting work in this area with yourselves. So get in touch with us on the links that have been shared by Kelly and of the links that were shared by Nithen, and I'm sure there's contact details at the bottom of the presentation that we shall be sending around. And we see you next time at our next webinar. So have a great day. Stay safe, everybody. Graham, stay safe with your colleagues in South Africa. We we are monitoring the post-Zuma situation there. I hope that you guys are, that the situation can normalize fairly quickly.
Martin, I think we're just looking for any excuse to come out to East Africa. But I've been trying to get back to Kenya for a long time, so any excuse to come and set up a shop in Kenya and come and work there, we're more than happy to do it.
Great, great. Thank you all very much and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
The thinking behind the setting up of the leadership group was really to enable me to share my experience and knowledge gathered over many years of work in the public and private sector, and to enable future leaders to benefit from this knowledge, but also to continue to learn new things which were coming up in this space of leadership and unleash their potential in this space of leadership to become better. We have grown and expanded as an organization, starting off with myself as the only person within the leadership group. Today, 5 years down the line, we work with many people as associates of the leadership group. We got a core competent of 4, and then we've got more than 10 experts that we work with to deliver our various programs. We have also developed partnerships with the academia. We do run, at the moment, a program on ethical leadership with Stellenbosch University in South Africa. We have partnerships with the Thunderbird School in Arizona, where we also partner on some of our programs. We have delivered programs through the county government system. So we've worked with a number of counties to deliver programs in the area of communication, in the area of service delivery and leadership generally. If I look back at some of the clients that we've worked with, there's literally no sector that the leadership group has not touched over its last 5 years that we're celebrating now.
Our engagement with the leadership group was very fruitful in that the team that delivered consultancy and facilitation of the program are people with experience.
The thing I liked about that is that it wasn't just a presentation that you make to everybody and say, this is what we need to do. It was tailor-made.
For me, the most exciting was the coaching that I got from Martin, who is still currently my coach. Coaching, what does it do? It builds your confidence, it improves your communication skills, and it improves your work performance. So those 3 things for me, the coaching has delivered over and over again.
One of the key things that I can say has been very impactful or very insightful is around external stakeholder engagement and management. When you're growing a young company like we are, you tend to focus a lot more internally in the business, getting things off the ground, getting things running. And what you then miss out is what is happening in your external environment, the relationships that are critical to take you to the next phase.